Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Davina. Thank you so much for joining. I'm the communications coordinator here at RPRA, and I'll also be the moderator for today's session. So welcome again to RPRA's webinar on the revised proposed 2023 fees for producers of hazardous and special products, specifically for category A and B materials. Today, we'll give an overview of the proposed fees, and we'll also be answering your questions. So to ask a question, we have a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. You can click on that, type in your question or comment, and click send. Please be aware that there is an upvote or a like feature where you can like someone's question, and all that does is moves that question up higher in the queue. So if you see a question that you'd like answered sooner, or you have the same question as someone else, please feel free to utilize that feature. You'll also see that throughout today's presentation, we have a few dedicated slides where we will stop to answer your questions. We will be trying to organize and respond to your questions that coincide with the topics that we're covering in that section. So if you notice that you've asked a question and it hasn't been answered, it may be because we'll be answering it in a later section of the presentation. If we can't get to your question today, or if it's very specific to your situation, please email us at consultations@rpra.ca. This webinar will also be recorded and will be posted to our website later today or early tomorrow. And we'll also be emailing all the attendees these materials. So if you've missed anything, or if you'd like to revisit this content, it will be available. So now I will hand it off to Noah Gitterman, who will start today's presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Davina. So I'll start with a little introduction about why we're here today before we get into the specifics of the proposal. So we're looking for feedback on a revised proposal for a 2023 HSP fees for material categories A and B. So just as a reminder, that includes the automotive materials plus paints and coatings, solvents, pesticides, and refillable, well, I'll just say pressurized containers. There's sort of two different categories of pressurized containers. In the fall, we consulted on our initial fee proposal, along with all of the RRCEA programs, tires, ITTAV and batteries, blue box, and lighting. And based on feedback we received during the consultation and some additional analysis by RPRA staff, we are coming forward with a revised proposal just on the HSP fees. So the 2023 fees for all of the other programs were approved by our board at the end of November and were published in, I think, on December 1st, or at least in the first part of December. But the board did not approve the HSP fees in order to give us an opportunity to get additional feedback on a revised proposal, which is different than what was proposed in the fall. And again, the focus here is on categories A and B. So HSP categories C, D, and E. Our proposal there, although those fees aren't approved yet, at least our proposal there is unchanged from where it was in the fall. So, Davina, maybe let's go to the next slide. Just at a high level, the aim of this revised proposal is to try to better balance the fee burden among producers of different material groups in categories A and B. And that's those groups are between what we're calling automotive materials on the one hand and paints, coating, and solvents, pesticides, and pressurized containers on the other. And again, the focus of sort of our revised proposal here and the feedback we're looking for is on the HSP fee model specifically. So the overall RPRA's overall 2023 budget and business plan, our cost allocation methodology, and our cost recovery targets for the different RRCEA programs isn't changing. All of that information remains the same. So I don't think we've repeated that information in the consultation materials here, but you can see them in our consultation materials from the fall. And of course, our business plan is also posted online. Next slide, please. So we're just a little bit on process. We're seeking feedback on this revised proposal until February 23rd. Just same process as it was in the fall, and same process as for all of our consultations. You can contact us at the email on the screen. If you have comments or questions, because this is a bit of a unique sort of additional opportunity for feedback, we're also offering to meet separately if you wish to discuss the proposal. Again, please use the consultations at RPRA email for all communications about the fee proposal. We will be, like with all of our consultations, we'll be summarizing the feedback we've received on HSP fees, both the feedback from the fall, plus any feedback we receive during this round. That will get published in a consultation report. Will get posted to our website with responses from RPRA, and ultimately the final fees will also be posted to our website, and you will all get notified of when all of that is available. There's you've probably already seen a consultation presentation that's on our website and was probably linked to in the communications about this webinar. And this presentation, which I think isn't exactly the same as the consultation deck, will also get posted to our website, I think, along with a recording of this webinar. Next slide, please. So we always do some background on who RPRA is and why we're here. It's maybe not as important because we just did this in the fall. And if you're here now, it may mean that you were also with us in the fall. But just to set the stage, we are a provincial regulator mandated to support transition under and wind up of legacy waste diversion programs under the WDTA, and implementing the new producer responsibility framework under the RRCEA. We also run digital reporting registries under the RRCEA for excess soil and hazardous waste. And in order to fund all of that work, we don't receive any government funding. All of our funding is through fees that we charge to our registrants on a cost recovery basis only. Next slide, please. So a bit more background on cost recovery. Again, just to set the stage. So for the RRCEA programs, including HSP, we collect annual fees from obligated parties, and the fees go to cover all of the costs in administering those programs, including developing and operating registry systems, carrying out compliance and enforcement, and providing support to our producers and service providers in complying with regulatory obligations. We talked about this in the fall. In 2021, we engaged an outside firm to conduct a third-party review of how we set fees, and an executive summary of that is posted online and was available as part of the first round of consultations in the fall. Next slide, please. So there's 4 main inputs into how we set fees. So I guess the starting point, even before we get to the 4 main inputs, is our general fee setting policy, which is posted online. Our fees are guided by the principles set out in that policy. And there's 4 main inputs into actually getting to a fee rate. So the first is our budget, and that's set out in our business plan that's online. The second is our cost allocation methodology, which guides how we allocate our cost recovery targets to each of the programs we operate. HSP is one of those programs. Then we develop a fee model to determine how and what the fee payers within that program are charged. Then we have estimates that get fed into that model, and the estimates typically are around the number of fee payers and the amount of material that's being supplied or generated for the program. Those are inputs into the fee model, which spit out the fee rate. So for more information on 1 and 2 in that list of 4 main inputs, you can see the materials we posted in the fall as part of the initial consultation. And you can also see the initially proposed 2023 HSP fee model and fee rate. Next slide, please.
Okay.
Oh, so sorry, Davina. Yeah, there's a pause here for questions if folks have any.
Yes, so we'll pause here for questions about RPRA, anything about our fee model right now. There will be another opportunity to ask questions. I do see that there is a question in the queue, and I'm going to wait on it just because it makes sense to ask it later in the presentation. But if anyone has any other questions regarding anything that Noah has just covered, please feel free to put it in the Q&A tab. As a reminder, this session is being recorded, and as Noah mentioned, these slides will be shared via email and on our website either today or tomorrow.
All right, well, maybe let's keep going, and we'll get to the questions we have maybe once we've
no problem.
Reviewed the proposal. All right, so let's I think we can skip the title slide and get right into it. So in the fall, we had proposed to continue using the same fee model that was approved for 2021 and 2022 fees. So there was a cost recovery target for all producers in those categories. And we'd collect it from producers by setting a per kilogram fee rate for every producer in that category producing more than 10,000 kilograms. Producers under that threshold will pay a flat fee. So that's consistent with how 2021 fees and 2022 fees were set. Also aligns very closely with the fee models for the other RRCEA programs. Like those other programs, it did not distinguish between the different material groups within the program. Within HSP, a large majority of producers in categories A and B report supply either of paints and coatings. On the one hand, I might call it paints as shorthand. And then on the other hand, oil filters, oil containers, and antifreeze, which we refer to as automotive materials. Under the initially proposed model, producers of paints would have been assessed about 85% of the total estimated cost of the 2023 HSP program, with producers of automotive materials being assessed a much smaller proportion. And some of the feedback we received in 2023, which is not dissimilar from feedback we received in previous years, was that this distribution of the fee burden is driven in part by aspects of the relative density of the materials in each of those two major groups. And I guess more broadly, that the distribution does not reflect the relative significance of both these material groups within the program. Next slide, please. Our revised fee model for categories A and B sort of proceeds in two steps. Rather than taking the total HSP budget and assessing it to producers based on weight reported, the revised proposal apportions the cost recovery target to two different groups of producers in categories A and B, and then assigns the per kilogram rate to each group separately. And the two groups we're proposing to use are producers of automotive materials on the one hand, and producers of the other materials on the other hand. And the way that we are proposing to allocate the recovery target is based on the number of producers in each of those two groups. Next slide, please. So part of the rationale for this revised proposal for how to set fees for the HSP program is to more evenly balance the fee burden for producers in categories A and B by allocating cost recovery targets again for the two major material groups, so paints on the one hand and automotive materials on the other, based on the number of producers in each group. And then we go on to apply the per kilogram fee rate within the group rather than collectively altogether. Part of the rationale for the proposal is also that the number of producers in each of those two material groups is being proposed as a reasonable indicator of the extent of RPRA resources required for registry support and compliance for both of those groups of materials. Compared to the original proposal, so the proposal in the fall, what this revised proposal does is shift cost burden in the HSP program to automotive material producers from paints and coatings producers. And there's a slide coming up that has some more detail on what that shift would mean. The proposal is that this shift reflects the significance of both paints and automotive materials within the program in terms of both the number of producers within each group and the amount of material that is obligated and available to be recycled at end of life. I would add the effort that RPRA needs to put into these two different material groups. I should add that our registry portals themselves reflect to some extent how we treat these two main material groups, because there is on an operational level, because there is a separate registry portal for automotive materials and another one for paints, coatings, and solvents. Another part of the rationale for this proposal is that while it allocates the HSP cost recovery target between these two different material groups, we're still retaining weight-based fee rates within each of those two groups, and that keeps the model consistent with our general fee setting policy, with RPRA's other registry programs, with the kinds of data that get reported through the HSP regulation, and our principles of equity and simplicity. So like we've said in past consultations, weight-based fees at the end of the day will help ensure that producers of the same products face the same costs on a per product basis, avoiding competitive impacts on consumer markets, and they help protect small producers from undue burden. So this new approach still retains that weight-based fee rate, but applies it after an allocation of the HSP program cost recovery target to the two different material groups, automotive materials on the one hand, and paints, coatings, solvents, and the others on the other hand. Next slide, please. So this is just some additional context in which to consider the proposal. There is precedent at RPRA for using the number of producers as an indicator of RPRA effort. The number of producers and service providers together is one of the key cost drivers in RPRA's overall cost allocation methodology. That's the what we sometimes refer to as the CAM, that assigns cost recovery targets to each of the programs. So there's precedent for using number of producers as a way to allocate. The distribution of RPRA costs, and I think on the next slide there's some more detail on the actual numbers. The distribution of RPRA costs in the revised proposal is a bit more consistent with the historical distribution of RPRA costs to automotive materials on the one hand and the other materials on the other under the legacy WDTA program. Again, just some additional context in which to consider the proposal. The revised proposal is also more consistent with the historical distribution of RPRA's costs to the different material groups as a percentage of overall management costs to producers under the legacy WDTA program. We don't have easy access to overall program costs, including management costs under the RRCEA. Next slide, please. So here's a breakdown, and I think a version of this chart was in the materials that were posted a couple of weeks ago when we started this additional round of feedback. And we're just trying to represent the shift in the fee burden as best we can between the initial proposal and the revised proposal. So you can see in the initial proposal, like I was describing earlier, paints, coatings, and solvents bear most of the cost of the program. Under the revised proposal, the automotive materials share of the program goes up substantially from 14% to 47%. The paints, coatings, and solvents share reduces substantially from 86% to around 53%. And so those allocations then leave you with the per kilogram rate in that last column on the right. Again, that's sort of the final step in the process. So where we plug in our estimated volumes or weights to recover the targeted cost recovery. Next slide, please. So this is just maybe a more formal version of the revised proposed fee schedule. So this kind of presentation is similar to what you would have seen in the fall and how we present our proposed fees. But the fee rates on a per kilogram basis here are the same as on the previous slide. There's some details at the bottom about how we calculate these amounts. Next slide, please.
Okay, we're back to our questions. There are a couple in the queue. So the first one is asking why the proposed fees are much higher than what was paid last year and much higher than the original proposal. And a follow-up question of, can this type of increase be expected for other materials or programs?
Sure, thanks for that question. So I hope I tried to explain in the presentation. So I assume the question is coming from someone in the producer in the automotive materials group.
Yes. That's
and so I hope I did what I tried to do in the presentation is explain a bit about why this is happening or why we're proposing this. It's really about trying to better balance the fee burden within the program. So we're that sort of better reflects the importance of the automotive material groups and the other groups within the program, better reflects where effort is being put by RPRA to administer these programs and make sure they're being run smoothly. And so we acknowledge that involves a shift, shifting fee burden means that some producers' fees will go up and some would go down under the new revised proposal.
perfect. Thank you, Noah. We have another question asking, the original proposal that was proposed in the fall was determined to be suitable. And in previous years, RPRA has not adapted the fee model for different densities of products to ensure equity. So what has changed or what new information has been received since the fall to support this revised proposal?
Right. I mean, we've gone through it. That's a good question. We've gone through a couple of rounds of HSP fees, 2021 and 2022, and we had the same fee model approach in each of those. I think one of the things that's changed is that now we've been through now 2 rounds of supply reporting by HSP producers. We have a better idea or better confidence in the kinds of volumes we're seeing and in the expected number of producers. We estimate for each of the material groups, getting some or discovering the stability in that data has helped us think a bit more about how the fee burden should be distributed in this program in a way that acknowledges on the ground how we approach it from an operational perspective.
Thank you, Noah. One more question in the queue. Is there a resource to calculate weights for the automotive program that does not require going into the registry or using previous reports?
So that's a good question. I don't know offhand, but I think we can get you the answer to that. I think there are weight conversion tables that are used when you're reporting supply, but I don't know offhand if that's done automatically or you need to do your own conversion. But we can have our registry team get back to you on that.
I do have from some of our supporting members on the team, there is a weight conversion table available in the registry procedure for HSP supply data verification. Okay, we have one more question. Does the magnitude of increase meet RPRA's general fee setting policy? And how can producers plan for and predict this level of increase in fees?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Our fee setting policy does not set out specific standards for what kind of increases are tolerable year over year. One of RPRA's goals and something we talked about a lot during the fee consultation in the fall is predictability in fees year over year. Certainly we want to we would also like to see stability for us and our producers. It's not this kind of increase is not something that in the normal course we think we would see very often. But I think part of the context here is that all of these programs are relatively new in terms of their implementation on the ground. We are still learning a lot, or at least over the past couple of years, we have learned a lot about how they need to be implemented and how they need to be supported. And you see the impact of that both in our budgets and forecasts for RPRA, and also in and here in this case in the fee model. Where things we're learning about the program over time are leading to different perspectives and different proposals for how to set our fees. So certainly at one of RPRA's goals over time is stability and predictability in our fee setting. And we're hoping to improve on that as we move forward.
Thank you, Noah. I don't see any more questions in the queue, but please keep them coming. I am going to take a quick pause to launch a poll that we do for all our consultations just to get some feedback. If you could please take the next 60 seconds to complete the poll, and then we'll get back to any remaining questions and the rest of the webinar. We'll just keep it open for a few more seconds. Thank you to everyone who's already filled it out. Okay, thank you. And we will continue with our questions. So we have one more question that says, why are RPRA's costs so high? We pay for the actual collection and disposal through the pro. So what justifies RPRA's overhead?
Yeah, that's a really good question. What RPRA does is very different from what the pros do. The pros are service providers who are there to help you do the collection and management you're obligated to do under the regulation. RPRA is here to enforce those laws and make sure that producers are reporting the information they're supposed to be reporting, and that it's accurate and correct, and that they're achieving their performance requirements on the collection and management side, and that service providers are also fulfilling their obligations in supporting producers in the programs. So I talked a little bit about what goes into our costs. So some of that is a development and operation of our registry, our electronic registry, which facilitates your the reporting you need to do. Some of that is the registry support we do that goes into helping producers, in particular producers, ensure they know how to report, and that they can do it in a way that is most efficient or makes most sense to them. There is also obviously a compliance and enforcement aspect. So we're here to ensure that the reporting is right, to verify the reports we get, to make sure the numbers are accurate, to make sure everyone who's supposed to be in the system is in the system. So catching free riders, and making sure the system is running in the way it's supposed to, through both collection and management. So if you're a producer and you've interacted with our registry support officers or compliance officers on how to do reporting and what the HSP regulation means and requires of you, you'll probably have gotten a bit of a sense of what kind of support is necessary to make sure these programs run properly. We've pointed out in the past that RPRA's costs are typically a pretty low percentage of the overall program cost. So if you look at overall collection and management costs, RPRA costs are a pretty small proportion of that. Overall, we don't have, pros aren't required to report their costs to us. We do have access to cost information from the legacy programs under the WDTA, but our understanding is typically RPRA's costs are a small proportion of that collection and management cost that the pro is doing. And I should probably mention that we try to, our business plan presents our budget every year. We try to do as much as we can to present a full picture of why our costs are what they are in the business plan, and why we're spending money where we're spending it. So if you haven't looked at it, we encourage it. If you have more questions about why we do spend what we do and why we spend it on the things we spend it on, we're happy to continue that that conversation, because it's an important one.
Thank you, Noah, for that explanation. Another question asking, were there any other fee models considered as part of the revised proposal analysis, such as the 3-tiered model?
So for 2023, we did not consider other fee models other than the ones we proposed, including the 3-tiered approach. I think just for others, the 3-tiered model was something we had looked at in advance of 2022 fees, along with our outside reviewer Optimus, which looked at the impacts of setting sort of rather than a weight-based fee, a flat fee in tiers on producers. It was rejected as an option for 2022, and we did not pursue it again for 2023. I think, there was a recommendation in the Optimus report that we come back at some point to look again at our fee models, and that's something we will consider doing in the future. But for now, that's not a model we've revisited.
Thank you. There is a question more so about pros. So how do we avoid back and forth between RPRA and pros for any issues producers are facing on executing any of these programs on a routine basis? What divides their responsibilities towards producers?
So that's a good question. I can help to try to answer it on a conceptual basis, but you'll probably want to connect with a compliance officer or someone else on the registry team to talk more about that. If you are feeling that there's a lot of too much back and forth, or there's something inefficient going on in terms of communications with your pro and with RPRA, we definitely want to hear about that. At a high level, your pro is your service provider. Your pro's there to do your collection and management for you. The collection and management you're obligated to do under the regulation. RPRA is the regulator. We're here to make sure that the information you're reporting to RPRA is accurate, and that you're fulfilling your collection and management obligations. So typically you're doing that through a pro. And so that's why we communicate a lot with your pro about how they are going about meeting collection and management obligations. We're here to make sure your obligations are met. The pro is there to provide you that collection and management service.
Perfect. And then this question is asking, Noah, you mentioned price stability, but this does not seem to be aligned with the significant increase in this proposal. Was a phased approach considered that would see this shift occur over a couple of years?
Yeah, so we have not proposed a phase in for this shift, but it's that's the kind of feedback that we encourage, and something we can consider as we finalize the proposal for our board.
Thank you so much. I don't see any more questions in the queue, so I'm going to go ahead to our last slide. Again, if you do think of any future questions, or if you want to ask any follow-up questions, please email consultations@rpra.ca. Over to you, Noah.
Thanks, Davina. Yeah, I guess just want to emphasize that again. We are interested in your feedback on the consultation that's posted on the website and what you heard in this webinar presentation. So please let us know. And you've got the usual channels on the screen here. And also, again, because, you know, we're speaking to a smaller group here, we're just focused on HSP. You know, we understand the revised proposal has particular impacts on certain groups. We're happy to meet to discuss in more detail if you think there's more information you need or you've got more questions that weren't answered or maybe weren't answered well during this presentation.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. As mentioned, this session was being recorded and will be emailed out later today or tomorrow and will be available on our website along with these slides. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you.